This is a full story. Puppy wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. At the class reunion, he arrived successful, accompanied by a beautiful girlfriend. She said, "If you hadn't let go back then, you'd be the wife of the T Group's CEO now." He sat across from me, holding his girlfriend, his expression indifferent. That's all in the past. The crowd, eager for drama, erupted into teasing laughter. Under his gaze, I silently covered the scars on my wrist and forced a smile. Yes, the two of us have nothing to do with each other anymore. I remember it was Haley who initiated the breakup, wasn't it? When his girlfriend stepped out to the restroom, the classmates seized the chance to gossip. "Haley, that's me." Tony sat across from me, a faint smile on his lips, but an icy coldness in his eyes. This was the first time we'd seen each other in 6 years since the breakup. Everything felt so sudden. I only came because the class monitor assured me Tony wouldn't be here. Yet, here we were. Tony was now a young entrepreneur, celebrated as one of the city's brightest stars. A returnee with an impressive resume, dressed sharply in a tailored suit with strikingly handsome features. Even the watch on his wrist was worth a fortune. Everyone admired and flattered him. As for me, I was no longer the person I used to be. "Yes, she was the one who suggested breaking up," Tony said calmly, answering the group's curiosity. Everyone jumped to their own conclusions. That I was materialistic, couldn't endure hardship, bet on the wrong person, and lost everything. "Haley, I heard the guy you were with after that ended up in jail, and you even helped him pay off his debts. Did you come to this reunion to ask for money?" As the mocking remarks flew, Tony's deep and steady gaze never left me, though he remained silent. I forced a smile, too embarrassed to respond. The door opened, and Tony's girlfriend returned, sensing the strange atmosphere. She smiled and asked, "What happened while I was gone?" Tony broke his silence, his tone gentle as he took her hand. "Nothing, just catching up." She sat down gracefully, her eyes briefly landing on me as a dimpled smile graced her face. "Tony mentioned you to me. If you hadn't let go back then, you'd be the wife of the T Group's CEO now." Amusement flickered in many eyes, schadenfreude plain to see. "Back then, my family was at the peak of its glory, and I was the center of attention everywhere I went. That jealousy hadn't faded over the years, but instead turned into their reason to kick me while I was down." Tony broke the awkwardness, his voice cold and firm. "That's all in the past." The room fell silent. Everyone understood he didn't want to continue this topic and quickly moved on. His girlfriend raised her glass to me. "Thank you for letting him go. Be sure to attend our wedding." I silently covered the scars on my wrist again and said blankly, "Congratulations. Why didn't you explain it to him?" Alice, my best friend, was furious on the phone. The reunion ended early. I stood in the cold wind, exhaling a puff of white air. "He has a girlfriend now." There was a pause on the other end. "He has a girlfriend?" Alice sounded incredulous. "Yes." Classmates left in twos and threes. The light from the street lamps reflected off the snowy ground, like shards of shattered glass. "What a shame. You finally saw him after all this time, after working so hard." "Alice, no one waits forever. Some things, if left unsaid at the time, only become disgusting if brought up later." The cold wind stung my eyes, and I blinked against the ache. "I've given up." Even after years of struggling out of the mud, hoping to meet him again with dignity, it was already too late. "Fine. We'll talk when you're back." It was close to Lunar New Year, and the temperature had dropped below freezing. Taxis were hard to find. I stood for a while, my hands going numb. My phone screen showed *Q in progress. Behind me came the sound of heels clicking on the pavement, accompanied by a soft, warm voice. "Tony, the snow is so beautiful. It's cold outside. Go wait in the car." "I'll be there soon," Tony replied in his distinct, deep voice. "Okay, but don't be long." As she passed me, she gave me a meaningful look before walking to the nearby car and opening the door. Her movements revealed the bracelet on her wrist, an unmistakable heirloom of Tony's family. It had once been on my wrist. After our breakup, I'd had someone return it to him. She wasn't just his girlfriend. She was his fiancée. The crowd thinned, leaving only me and him. My taxi still hadn't arrived. Tony stood behind me in silence, saying nothing. Under the street lamp, our shadows overlapped slightly. My thoughts drifted to the night we broke up. Tony had gotten into a car accident on his way to meet me. His friend had called, his tone harsh. "Tony's in the hospital. Is it life-threatening? Are you only coming if it is? Please take good care of him. Haley, he got an offer to study abroad. He'll make something of himself. Why can't you just wait a little longer? Are you really that desperate for money? Everything he's done for you, don't you remember? Are you that ungrateful?" The phone was suddenly snatched away on the other end, followed by the sound of it being slammed down. "You could say I was the one who abandoned him. It was natural for him to hate me. How much do you owe?" Tony's cold voice pulled me from my thoughts. It's none of your business. I took a deep breath of icy air. My throat, irritated from the alcohol, ached sharply, and I began coughing uncontrollably. The cold air cut through my windpipe like knives, leaving me doubled over, gripping the lamppost for support. The alcohol churned in my stomach and tears streamed down my face from the coughing. Tony stood beside me, watching coldly. The taxi finally pulled up, and the driver leaned out. Are you heading to Wanha Mansion? Yes. I steadied myself, catching my breath as I reached for the car door, only to be grabbed by the arm and dragged back. I stumbled into Tony's chest as he demanded, "What are you doing there?" Wanha Mansion was an upscale residential area that didn't allow easy access. I half-heartedly pushed at Tony's hand, but he gripped my wrist firmly. The warmth of his touch seeped into my chilled skin and straight to my heart. I struggled twice, but couldn't break free. Looking up at Tony's inscrutable expression, I asked, "What does the CEO of T Group want to say to me?" His lips pressed into a line, his dark eyes deep and unreadable. The cold wind roared, tangling my hair. I forced a smile and voiced his thoughts. "You're just like everyone else. You think my money's dirty, don't you? 50,000 a month. Is that enough?" Tony's cold words interrupted me. "What?" His gaze finally revealed a trace of mockery. "You need money, don't you? 50,000. 100,000. How much do you want?" The sound of my palm striking his cheek echoed in the cold night. A clear red mark appeared on his face. In the distance, his fiancée gasped in shock and ran out of the car. "Live your life well, don't overreach." I left him with that and got into the taxi. "Did you hit him?" Alice handed me a cup of hot water. "Yeah." He tried to keep me as his mistress. I curled up on the couch, enduring waves of stomach cramps, sipping the water slowly. After a moment, I suddenly turned and ran to the bathroom to vomit. Alice patted my back. "Your stomach is bad, and you still drank alcohol." I gasped for air, wiping the water off my lips after rinsing. My esophagus burned like fire. Was it worth it, loving him for so many years? I lifted my eyes, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Wet lashes, black hair sticking to my forehead, and a pale face. Alice's complaints felt distant, hard to make out. If you hadn't been so heartless and broken up, he wouldn't be where he is today. I thought of Tony's fiancée again. Compared to me, she was radiant and full of life. I vaguely remembered how, years ago, I used to be like that. But after falling so hard, crawling out of the pit, everything had changed. After Alice finished her work at the Wanha estate, we held hands and walked back to the rented apartment. I suddenly received a call from Tony's brother. "Haley, if you're struggling, I can arrange a job for you." I said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "They're getting married next month. Serena's a good person, and her family is well off. I won't bother him again. Don't worry." He was silent for a while, offering a futile explanation. "We just want Tony to have a better life, All our old friends, without exception, had sided with Tony. After the call ended, Alice's eyes turned red. "They don't know anything. It's fine. Since I needed to stay in this area for a while, I found a job nearby." During the interview, the HR representative asked suspiciously, "Do you have depression?" "Something from the past. I've recovered. I have a doctor's note." Previous companies had turned me down during background checks because of this. This company was small, and I received an offer the same evening. I thought the class reunion was the last time Tony and I would cross paths. But 3 days later, Tony unexpectedly joined our company as a director and became my boss. My desk was moved directly outside his office. "I refuse," I said. "All right." Tony didn't even look up, coldly responding, "Submit your resignation to HR, then." I laughed bitterly. "You're firing me just because I refuse to move desks?" His pen paused as he finally deigned to look up at me. "I simply gave you a choice. Do you really think I care about you in any way?" I was at a loss for words, remembering Alice arguing over rent the previous night. Forcing a smile, I said, "President Tony, you're so virtuous. I have nothing to fear." Tony nodded slightly. "Thank you. Close the door on your way out. And turn your chair so it faces away from me. I don't want to see your face." For the rest of the days, we hardly interacted. A week later, there was a company team-building event. As a newcomer, I was pressured to drink a lot. "Haley, if you don't drink, we'll dock your pay. Don't worry. If you're drunk, we'll take you back. We're all women. What's there to fear?" With laughter and coaxing from the manager, I downed my final drink of the night and collapsed, unconscious, on the table. The next morning, I woke up on a large bed. Bright sunlight streamed in, making it hard to open my eyes. I sat up, and the blanket slid off, revealing a soft bathrobe wrapped around me. Stunned, I got up and walked out. In the spacious living room, Tony sat with his legs crossed, reading the morning paper, also dressed in a hotel bathrobe. Seeing me, he lifted his gaze indifferently. "Awake? Breakfast is on the table. Eat and then get some more rest. A chill ran through me as I turned pale. Tony casually tossed the newspaper onto the coffee table, slightly loosening his collar to reveal ambiguous marks. Unfortunately, you were the one who took the initiative last night. I froze, struck by lightning. My memory of last night was a complete blank. Impossible. Tony placed a contract in front of me, bearing my fingerprint. Its contents were simple. I would become his mistress, and he would pay me 100,000 yuan monthly. This can't be my fingerprint. Oh, Tony chuckled. Are you sure? Facing his calm, unwavering gaze, I opened my mouth but couldn't form a word. Ignoring my discomfort, he pulled out a recording device. I accidentally recorded your confession last night. Haley, want to hear your filthy thoughts? I shivered, feeling like I'd fallen into an icy abyss. A wave of shame consumed me. Such thoughts, already revolting when hidden, became unbearable when exposed as evidence. Tony lowered his gaze, hiding the emotions in his eyes. Coveting another woman's husband. Haley, how about letting them hear this recording? Clenching my fists tightly, I dug my nails into my palms. Are you doing this to get back at me? Yes, he answered plainly. You didn't want me to have it easy back then. Why should I let you off now? 2 options. Either fulfill the contract, or I make the recording public. The clock in the corner ticked loudly, echoing alongside my heartbeat, striking my eardrums. With cracked lips, I numbly looked up. Then go ahead and make it public. Under his icy gaze, I said, as if detached from myself. Tony, I won't be the other woman. Tony studied me seriously, then smirked. Haley, who do you think you are? Do you think you even have a choice anymore? In the bathroom, I found my clothes disheveled. Meanwhile, Tony's suit hung neatly on the rack by the door, untouched. The scene before me pierced my heart. Sighing softly, I changed and walked out of the hotel. Alice called, her voice trembling. Haley, they want 500,000. The sky was gray, with no sun in sight. To pay for my treatment, Alice had saved little, and my own savings were paltry. They said if we don't pay, they'll expose everything about you, and they won't tell us where your mom's relics and ashes are. I'll try to request an advance on my salary and borrow some. I should be able to gather it by next month. All right. After hesitating, I dialed a number. It rang for a long time before connecting. Haley, what is it? Breathing out a puff of cold air, I said, Dr. Rocky, I'm sorry to bother you, but Rocky seemed busy, and after some shuffling, he found a quieter place. Are you in trouble? He asked patiently. Taking a deep breath, I said, can you lend me 400,000 yuan? It was my first time borrowing money from someone. As the words left my mouth, my entire body burned with shame. There was a sudden commotion on his end. Dr. Rocky, emergency surgery. I'll be there, he replied. I had no high hopes and braced myself for him to hang up. But just before he ended the call, he said simply, send me your account number. I'll transfer it to you today. Then the line went dead. The sky was still gray, but the cold, monotonous busy signal suddenly felt warm. In the evening, the manager knocked on my desk. We're having dinner with the clients tonight. You're coming along. A few hours ago, I had just advanced a month's salary from him. With the borrowed money and my previous savings, I barely managed to scrape together 500,000. As I walked into the private room, I saw Tony. I watched his tall figure effortlessly chatting with the crowd. The light from the crystal chandelier reflected off, highlighting his handsome profile. The manager gently pushed me forward. Suddenly, all eyes were on me. Mr. Tony, is this person from your company? Tony glanced casually, smiling. Yes, a newcomer. What kind of newcomer needs Mr. Tony to personally bring along? Not bad looking. During the casual conversation, everyone took their seats. The manager arranged for me to sit next to Tony, whispering, be smart tonight, block the drinks when you need to. The group subtly asked, Mr. Tony, can this new employee drink or not? Before Tony could answer, the manager hurriedly replied, can drink, can drink. Saying that, he pushed a glass in front of me. Start with a toast. Tony smiled silently, lightly tapping the table. I raised my glass, took a deep breath, and drank it all down. The spicy liquor rushed down my throat without restraint, igniting a fire all the way to my stomach, which churned and roared. The crowd applauded, just about to continue when Tony spoke. Changing the subject, where were we? Let's continue. The atmosphere was lively, and many wanted to toast Tony. He excused himself, saying his stomach wasn't well and didn't drink a drop. In the end, the manager found ways to get it all into my stomach. Eventually, I couldn't hold on any longer and went to the bathroom. The faucet in the sink was on, and I gagged uncontrollably. My hair became loose and fell into the sink, quickly getting wet. After sending Alice a message, I completely ran out of energy. Hunched over the sink, eyes closed, gasping heavily. Outside, the sound of steady footsteps approached. The door was pushed open. I thought it was a woman coming to use the restroom. But to my surprise, Tony's voice came through, calm and composed. "Can't hold on anymore?" I gathered all my strength, stood up, and staggered toward the door. Tony grabbed my arm and pulled me back. His large hand rested on my neck. Hot, burning. "Let go of me." The acid from my stomach burned my throat, every word bringing pain. Tony effortlessly dragged me to the mirror, making me face it, lifting my chin with a cold laugh. "Take a good look at yourself. If you go out looking like this, aren't you afraid someone with bad intentions will target you?" In the mirror, my eyes were teary, cheeks flushed, hair messy, hanging by my ears, and my collar open. Through the mirror, Tony's deep gaze wandered unchecked over my body. I closed my eyes, trembling slightly. "Who could be more sinister than you?" Tony chuckled, kissing my ear. "Come back with me tonight, okay? Get lost." He ruthlessly blocked my mouth, forcefully pressing out the air from my lungs. My blood, under the influence of alcohol, boiled like molten lava, crashing through my body. The light blurred into clumps, water droplets felt like they were separated by a membrane. Each drop, like sulfuric acid on my heart, making it unbearable. I broke out in a cold sweat, weakly slapping at him. It felt like I was being dragged back into those dark days, helplessly staring at the dazzling world around me, feeling so out of place. "Tony, can you just let me go?" I was silently falling, crashing into the depths of a well. It probably hurt, but I couldn't feel it anymore. "Haley." Tony called my name, no longer with that look of wishing I would die. He panicked. So much so that I couldn't tell if the person in front of me was the young version of him or the present him. I said, "Tony, I never want to see you again." This fever came on strong. My mind was a mess, my whole body ached terribly, and I curled up in the blanket, tossing and turning. Outside, the north wind howled, and in my daze, I dreamt of the past. I lay on Tony's back, asking, "Tony, what will happen if I die?" He carried me steadily forward, softly comforting me. "Don't say that, it's just a fever. You'll be fine after the injection." "Hey, is your living allowance enough?" "Injections are expensive." "It's okay. How can it be okay? How many jobs are you working?" Tony didn't answer. He put me at the nurse's station, squatting in front of me, seriously saying, "As long as you're safe, I don't care about anything else." I huddled inside my thick down jacket, hesitating. "When Dad and Mom stop fighting, I'll ask them for living expenses and pay you back." Tony touched my hair, his gaze gentle. "Trust me, we'll have money in the future." But things didn't go as he hoped. That night, Tony went to another province for a competition. And when I returned home, I opened my parents' bedroom door. Dad was holding another woman in his arms. My shiny, glamorous life began to crumble from that moment. What followed was intense fighting between my parents, Dad disappearing without a word, and Haley's family sinking into debt. One late night, a group of middle-aged men came to collect debts. The flickering lights above, the men shouting excitedly, the dull pain and disgusting touch of skin, and my mother's heart-wrenching curses all mixed into a chaotic mess, swirling in my mind. The scene in the mirror seemed to fast forward. Mom was forced to death in the bathtub by the debt collectors. Alice found me, half-dressed, and took me to the distant South City. On a rainy day, I curled up in the corner of a hospital, dressed in mourning clothes, looking disheveled. "She has a hereditary depression disorder. Does she have any relatives?" Alice looked at me with concern. "She has a boyfriend, but he's out of town for a competition. Tell him to come." The doctor's voice, mixed with professional jargon. "She's showing clear suicidal tendencies now. Treatment is difficult, and for the next few years, she won't be able to be alone. The family should be prepared for a long battle." At that time, my mental state was beyond repair, and I couldn't even think about calling the police to seek justice anymore. Alice and I were like two stray dogs. We discarded our armor and fled from the place where we had lived all our lives. On the same day, Tony's name appeared first on the list of competition winners. He won a spot to go abroad. He called me. When I picked up, all I could hear was the howling wind. "Haley," Tony's voice was extremely gentle. "I won't disappoint you. 3 years later, I'll marry you." I looked at the slowly closing iron gate, and I couldn't find my way back home anymore. "Tony, I might not be able to be with you." I choked on my words, tears quietly falling. He held his breath. "Why?" I opened my mouth, hesitated for a moment. His future was bright. Should I selfishly trap Tony's life in the rainy South City? Outside the window, a girl was crying uncontrollably behind the bars. A boy's face was full of numbness and disgust. I saw love disappearing from his eyes, and it was devastating. The wind lifted my hair, revealing dark bruises and marks on my neck. I wiped my tears and said, "Tony, you're fine. Let's just call it quits." The sound of ticking instruments filled the air. The sunset filtered through the slats of the blinds, casting a beautiful golden shimmer on the sofa not far away. I blinked and the nightmare slowly faded. I sat up. The man was sitting on the sofa, quietly peeling an apple. His long, fair fingers moved skillfully, and in a short while, a perfectly whole fruit appeared, smooth and clean. It was Tony. Hearing the movement, he looked up, met my gaze, silently stood up, and pressed the bell. The doctor quickly walked in, checked my pupils, confirmed I was fine, and then spoke to Tony. She's not getting enough nutrition, and her diet should focus on more protein. Tony nodded, thank you. The door closed. He walked over to the bed and handed me the apple. Don't think about anything, just focus on getting better. I didn't take it but got out of bed, opening the cabinet and searching. My phone was missing. There were no clothes to wear either. He let me rummage through the room. Tony, what are you trying to do? I stood barefoot on the floor, a beam of sunlight streaming in, reflecting my pale and weary face in the glass. You don't know what I want? Tony placed the apple on the bedside table, took out a tissue, and calmly wiped his hands. I want you. He sat in the light, his dark eyes blatantly watching me, his gaze hot and shameful. I trembled, clenching my fists. Tony, you can't do this to me. Tony stood, took 2 or 3 steps toward me, and looked down at me, smoothing my hair. Why can't I? I have someone I like. Please stop bothering me. Is that so? Tony's face showed no smile. He cupped my face, leaned down, and stopped with his lips an inch from mine. I couldn't break free. As I turned my head, eyes closed, my body uncontrollably shuddered. Tony smiled, his cold voice pouring into my ears. Haley, you're lying. The private hospital was located on the outskirts, with endless trees outside the window. I couldn't get out, and I couldn't contact anyone. I had once tried asking the doctor and nurses for help, but they said they couldn't do anything. Tony came every day. Most of the time, it was in the evening. He would rush over, chat with me for a while. I strongly resisted his affectionate gestures, but Tony didn't force me. Recently, I had been dreaming a lot about the past. Back then, I would constantly mention Tony's name. I said, Tony, you'll be very rich and successful one day. Tony sighed silently. What kind of milk do you want today? Banana flavor. And so, to buy me banana milk. Top student Tony skipped class for the first time and got caught by the teacher. Later, we went to university. Rumors started about him and the campus beauty. I took the subway for several stations, sitting under the boys' dormitory, crying. In the middle of the night, Tony dressed hurriedly, rushed downstairs, gently wiped away my tears. Don't cry. If you want me, I'm yours. In the future, it'll only be you. That's not how confessions work. He froze, then hugged me tightly. I love you. Back then, we probably didn't expect that, years later, things would end up like this. Tomorrow, I'm getting married. The sunset outside had not yet set, and its warmth lingered. Tony's voice pulled my distant thoughts back. Do you have anything you want to say to me? I held the half-drunk milk, staring at his face in a daze. Suddenly, I understood why I had been dreaming so much lately. I was saying goodbye to the past Haley and Tony. Every day on TV, they played news about him and Serena, the golden couple, a match made in heaven. That had once been the future we hoped for. But now, with Haley buried in debt, what right did I have? Congratulations, I said. Hope you have children soon. Tony paused his apple slicing, the knife grazing his fingertip, blood quickly oozing out. He froze for a moment, wiped it with a tissue, then looked down and smiled. It's fine. She and I are just going through the motions. Do you want children? I don't mind. Tony, can we just leave it at that? I suddenly felt so tired. Let's keep things dignified. Tony stopped slicing the apple, threw it back into the fruit basket, and stared at the nest with a mocking smile. Leave it at that? Why? You started it, and in the end, you casually left after playing with me. What does that make me? A dog? I closed my eyes and pushed away the sunlight that blurred my vision. Then I'll give you back what you want. Tony stiffened. What did you say? I gazed at the setting sun. If you don't want me to be happy, I can just die. Suddenly, my chin was grabbed, my head forced to turn, and I met Tony's eyes, full of fury. Haley, are you crazy? Why didn't you die back then if you wanted to so badly? I can't remember when he left. That night, Tony's brother, Jack, who was also my friend from many years ago, burst through the door. Haley, what did you promise me? He bombarded me with questions, leaving me confused. Do you know how much Tony will lose by breaking off the engagement? You're an adult now. Can you stop being so reckless like before, letting Tony clean up after you? Can you think about him for once? What's wrong? What's wrong? Jack scoffed, roaring at me. Tony is calling off the wedding because of you. And you still ask me what's wrong? My ears were ringing as I sat there, my mind blank. He was publicly calling off the wedding. Where did that leave me? Was I just the third party who ruined someone's family? Jack forcefully dragged me off the bed. You're coming with me. You used to be so good at this, didn't you? playing around, finding new loves. Always with an excuse. Just pick one. Jack. Haley. Jack trembled in anger. If you don't come back, will all of this still happen? His roar echoed in the wind and snow, and the north wind howled, freezing all my senses. My ears were buzzing, and I couldn't hear anything. His eyes were full of unprecedented hatred, as if I deserved to die for being like this. Jack, it's him who won't let me go. Jack's face turned cold. Once this is over, I'll send you away. The office building was brightly lit late into the night. Jack dragged me in, but unfortunately, the press conference had already started. Tony sat calmly under the spotlight. I've heard the reason for your canceled wedding is because of a third party. He handled the reporter's question with ease. There were some differences between Miss Alice and I, and we broke up amicably. Jack's face turned pale, tightly gripping my wrist, preventing me from running away. But according to insiders, you've rekindled a romance with your first love. Tony remained unfazed. It's all rumors. If there are no other questions, the press conference is over. Just as he stood up, someone suddenly shouted, "She's here. It's her." The cameras in the room all turned towards us in an instant. I was exposed under the spotlight, disheveled and shocked. The reporters surged toward me, surrounding me in seconds. One question after another. What is your relationship with Tony? Did you really interfere in someone's marriage? The sound of shutters clicking filled the air. Tony's smile froze. He stood up and pushed his way through the crowd toward me. No, I didn't. I weakly tried to defend myself, but my voice was soon drowned out by their intense curiosity, and questions kept coming. There's new evidence. A reporter shouted in excitement, holding up a phone, which played a recording of my voice. Hoarse and vaguely drunken, like mumbling, "Tony, I love you." It was a voice recorder. A wave of panic surged through me. I once thought nothing could make my life worse, but when this storm truly hit, I was completely destroyed. Isn't she the mistress? Shameless. Whispers among the crowd felt like slaps to my face. The color drained from my face instantly, and the recording nailed me to the pillar of shame. Sorry, Jack. Take her away. Tony pushed through the crowd, his face showing panic for the first time. My vision blurred. Then I heard someone clearly saying, her father owed debts, her mother committed suicide. She had severe family genetic depression, and was locked up in South City's mental hospital for 5 years. Isn't she mentally ill? A stone stirred up 1,000 waves. The crowd gasped. What's she doing out, causing trouble? She's crazy. Why didn't she just die? Tony's steps faltered. He looked up at me, stunned, shock, disbelief. Unbelievable. I sat helplessly in the noise of the crowd, my blood growing colder by the second until I felt frozen to the core. Haley. Tony was calling my name, his voice trembling. I knew what was coming next. I just quietly waited for the guillotine to fall, completely destroying my life. She was also violated. That was the final sentence of the anonymous tip. The moment I heard it, Tony's face turned as white as paper. Since that day, when he returned from the company, Tony hasn't spoken a word. The blinds were closed for 3 days, and the light couldn't penetrate the dim room. Missed calls on his phone filled the screen. He didn't open a single one. It felt like time had pressed the pause button on him. Tony sat there, head bowed, lifeless. He still remembered the cold tone of the man who took Haley away. He said, "We all hope she survives. Mr. Tony is truly ruthless. Without breaking a sweat, he makes all our efforts go to waste." Alice was stopped by security at the door, shouting at him, "Tony, do you know she'll get sick if she doesn't take her medicine? Locking her up is like murder, depression, mental hospital." These words felt like sharp thorns, stirring in his mind, mercilessly tugging at his nerves. Jack knocked on the door and finally opened a crack, standing in the doorway. "Bro, are you feeling better? Why?" Tony's voice was hoarse, and the dull pain in his chest made him want to die. Jack was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry, I didn't think it was necessary to investigate. So, the information was fake, wasn't it?" Tony's voice was light. "Jack, when you told me she had several boyfriends abroad, Haley was locked up in a mental hospital in South City. I'm sorry, bro, I didn't know." The explanation was feeble and powerless. He knew he couldn't blame Jack entirely. Maybe if he had asked more questions, things wouldn't have turned out like this. Tony no longer had the energy to listen to Jack's defense. Alice, disregarding the secretary's attempts to stop her, pushed open the door. The blinding light made Tony squint, but he didn't stop her. The secretary repeatedly apologized. "I'm sorry, President Tony, I didn't keep watch." "Get out," Tony said. The secretary cautiously closed the door behind her, and the room returned to its dimness. Alice stood there, seemingly unwilling to be associated with him. President Tony, there's something I can say now. A small crack in the window let in the biting cold wind. Tony sat still, unmoving, quietly listening. When you do something wrong, there are always consequences. Sooner or later. Last year, on Haley's birthday, I jokingly asked her who she liked most in this world. She said, first her mom, second Tony. Tony closed his eyes, and that sentence sent a chill deep into his bones. At that time, her illness had just improved. She only needed to take a small pill every day to be like a normal person. So this year, to help Aunt clean up her things, I brought her back. Alice's eyes were red. She always said that the breakup was too ugly. This time, she just wanted to reunite with you properly, even if it's just from a distance, to see her big entrepreneur, because she knew she no longer deserved you. Tony, does she not deserve you? Do you know how hard she fought for that competition spot? Tony's hands slowly clenched as if he could see the truth that could break him. Back then, it was already decided. Haley wrote a letter to report for fairness, and that spot was given to you. But as a result, she offended many people, and later, after her father ran off, she and her mother were harassed by many. The invisible hand strangled Tony's neck, making it hard for him to breathe. She had been bullied. Was it because of this? Alice continued. At that time, you were out of province for the competition, probably for a week without calling back. So you should not have known that things were falling apart here. Haley's family collapsed, her father ran off with his mistress, and a group of debt collectors blocked their door, threatening Haley and her mother's lives. Aunt committed suicide, leaving Haley to be bullied, and then she got sick. At her worst, I couldn't leave her for even a second. She was tortured to the point where she didn't even look like a person. Alice stared at Tony. When you had the car accident, Haley cried and begged me to let her die. How did you expect her to get through it? Tony's face turned ashen, and he closed his eyes. The memories of the past few months tortured him endlessly. He had allowed the manager to get Haley drunk and sent her to his room. He had seduced her into drunken confessions, and heartlessly forged a fake contract with no legal standing, just to see her struggle and suffer. Humiliation after humiliation, mockery after mockery. Finally, he had obsessively locked her in a private hospital in the suburbs. Alice had visited him many times, but he never saw her. He had asked her if she was sick and why she didn't die back then. Haley's eyes had grown hollow, often staring at him, motionless. He had mistakenly thought she still loved him at that time. But now, he realized, Haley had silently questioned how he could treat her so cruelly. Why didn't you tell me? Alice broke down in tears. How do I explain? She was sick, and living was a luxury. The only thing she could do was make sure that the people she cared about wouldn't be dragged down by her. She considered your studies more important than anything. That competition was your chance for a breakthrough, and she fought for it with her life. She just wanted you to be okay. Tony, should she have died? Should she have died? That question hit Tony's heart like a hammer. It was him who had tangled with her, tormented her, and watched her suffer. It was him who, knowing she was educated, used a contract to humiliate her. It was him who deserved to die. We tried many ways to make Haley want to live. In the end, we found that only one thing worked for her. Tony suddenly couldn't bear to hear more. Alice smiled bitterly. Your name. She always remembered her big entrepreneur. When I left back then, I joked with Alice that I would never return to this place again. It turns out, I shouldn't have made such a flag. I'm sick again. In Nanchang, the winter is only dry. In previous years, it would rain freezing rain, but this year, it's unprecedented. It's snowing. The doctors and nurses were chatting, saying, this year is a cold winter. TSK, the Earth's climate is becoming increasingly uninhabitable for humans. The new year is approaching, and the tree branches outside are bare, not a leaf in sight. I pressed my face against the window, exhaling, and a layer of mist appeared on the glass. There's someone downstairs. He stands there every day. Isn't it cold? Alice walked past with a cup of hot milk, her face expressionless. Oh, really? Maybe it's not cold. She's been in a bad mood lately. Even Dr. Rocky is. So every day, I tread carefully, afraid I might upset them. Alice paused, realizing she might have scared me, and softened her tone. Drink the milk, wait an hour before taking your medicine. Dr. Rocky said he'll take you out to build a snowman tonight. I looked at the person again, feeling that he seemed familiar. Alice pulled the curtains shut. Don't look, you might blind yourself. Okay. I went back to bed, took my medicine, and leaned against the pillow to play games. Outside, I could hear Alice talking with Dr. Rocky. Then, he pushed the door open and walked in. I quickly hid my phone, sitting up straight. I've taken the medicine. The smell of disinfectant filled the room. Dr. Rocky's gaze scanned me and then fixed on my face. Miss Haley, I won't scold you for playing games. My face turned bright red as I slowly took my phone out. How did you know I was playing a game? I play too. I'm very familiar with the background music. After washing his hands, Dr. Rocky took off his white coat, his gaze catching me through the mirror, slightly smiling. Aren't you going to get dressed? I said I'd take you out to build a snowman. He's from the chest surgery department of the same hospital. The first time I met him, it seemed to be in the fall. The weather was rare and clear. I crouched by the fence, picking up a yarn ball that had suddenly appeared outside. Rocky passed by, looking down at me. I was out of breath. Excuse me, could you help me pick it up? He glanced at the hospital sign and said, according to the rules, you can't touch anything dangerous. Seeing that I didn't move, he asked again, what do you want to do? Play with the string. Rocky looked at the time, crouched down, and said, then I'll play with you. After we're done, I'll take the string with me. His lunch break was short, but I quietly reached out from behind the fence and played with him for a while. When he had to leave, I said, thank you. Later, we met a few more times. He was busy and didn't really pay attention to me. Until one day, he came again, pulled out a string, and said, sorry, I've been too busy lately. Afterward, he started talking to me. You don't talk much. I can't say too much. Why? I'm sick. Probably can't say anything pleasant. Can't dump emotional garbage on others. Rocky stared at me, silent. Later, he came more frequently. Sometimes, he looked very tired. I tried learning some jokes and told him, and each time Dr. Rocky would look at me gently. He asked, Haley, what's your wish? I hope everyone is happy, including myself. I quickly put on my gear, waiting for Rocky to put on his down jacket, then took my hand and led me downstairs. There's a security check every few steps here. Only he can take me out. Under the night sky, snowflakes fell in a flurry and my hat quickly turned white. Rocky handed me a small shovel. Do what you can. Okay. The cold air strangely lifted my mood as I carried the shovel and circled around the frozen fountain. When I turned around, I suddenly saw Tony standing not far away. His eyes bloodshot, his chin covered in stubble, just watching me. Tony? My voice was light, surprised. Tony's lips moved. Haley, I was wrong. If it had been before, I would have proudly and arrogantly asked, what did you do wrong? But now, I just held the snow shovel, awkwardly lowering my head. It's fine. I've been through so much suffering that I've lost my sharp edges. The wind howled through the snow in the dark night. Tony slowly walked closer, crouched in front of me, his voice hoarse. How can it be fine? Haley, please, say something to me, okay? I thought for a moment, then seriously said, I wish for our health in the new year. In that instant, all the color drained from Tony's face. Tears streamed down, trembling. Don't treat me like this, please. I touched his face, it was cold, so cold. Then, like back in the day, I cupped his face and said seriously, I wanted to meet you in a dignified way, but it turned into a mess. I'm sorry, it's my fault. Tony said, if I had only, it's my choice to leave your life. I can't blame anyone else. I spoke slowly, a little sad. At the class reunion, I asked the class president. I only went because you weren't there. I don't know why he lied to me. I just wanted to hear some news about you, to see if you were doing well. Tony cried uncontrollably. I'm sorry, it's me, it's my fault. Is that so? I smiled a little, not knowing what I was feeling. Haley, I'm sorry, I couldn't be there when you needed me the most. Tony held my hand, eventually noticing the scars on my wrist. You don't need to apologize. I didn't want to force you to stay. Many years later, when we go through tough days, we'll argue and dig up old accounts, counting who owes whom. I patiently removed the snowflakes that had fallen on his eyelashes. Tony, I'm really happy to see you successful. But I said I'd make money for you to spend. Tony held my hand. Without you, what do I need those things for? I blinked, my nose red from the cold. You see, my scarf cost more than 100 yuan. I already have enough money. The light in Tony's eyes faded, trembling. I can't go back, can I? Tony, you have your life, and I need to walk my own path. I won't go back to Beijing. Hurtful words are not easily forgotten, are they? Everyone has memories. I've been nailed to the pillar of shame, and if I return, every step I take will feel like walking on a blade. That would be 1,000 times more painful than letting go of a relationship. Tony took a deep breath, held my hand, and like in the past, tried to warm it up again. I'm sorry about the recording. It was I who tempted you to speak. That night, I didn't touch you. My eyes heated up. Tony, then apologize to me, just say you're sorry. He was in agony, greedily engraving my face into his memory as he made his final farewell. Sorry. I gently patted his shoulder, and in the end, didn't say, it's okay. Tony, I wish you peace and happiness for the rest of your life. The snow in the sky grew heavier. I turned around and stepped forward with all my strength, my body being blown sideways by the wind. Behind me, the wind and snow howled, the sound fading away. I couldn't tell if it was the wind or Tony's cries. Rocky stood under a yellow streetlight, wearing a camel-colored coat, hands in his pockets. I could vaguely see his sharp eyebrows and focused gaze. I walked closer. He asked, as if nothing had happened, "What did you see?" I shook the snow off my hat, looked up, my eyes slightly red. Dr. Rocky, thank you. A few days later, I saw Tony's face on the entertainment section of the news. He had lost a lot of weight. In the interview, he told the media everything he had done, confessing it all. It was he who forced me, and that recording was something he guided me to make. At the same time, he revealed a signed agreement. The signatories were him and Serena, a 2-year engagement period which had expired, ending in a peaceful separation. A mutually beneficial partnership. They hadn't planned to marry. That night was originally set in the agreement, a press conference to announce the end of their engagement. This incident was undoubtedly a catastrophic blow to Tony's company, and his reputation and position that had been built over many years crumbled instantly. Later, Jack called me. He said, "I'm sorry, Haley, I owe you an explanation." He said he had misjudged people. Serena had ulterior motives and exposed my story. The creditors who once extorted $500,000 from me after Tony took me to a private hospital couldn't contact me anymore. They turned around and sold my information to Serena at twice the price. He also said he was very concerned about Tony's work state and asked if I could return. My answer remained the same. I've said everything I needed to, and beyond that, I'm powerless. 3 months later, my condition had stabilized, and I was about to be discharged. The warm sunlight spread across my body, and outside the window, spring flowers bloomed. The familiar scent of disinfectant filled the air. I knew it was Rocky. "Is there anything to eat? I've been busy all day. Give me a bite." He had been so busy lately, always searching for food here. I unwrapped my wool scarf and revealed a steaming red bean bun. Rocky took it without hesitation, tearing off the wrapping and eating it eagerly. I just stared until he humorously asked, "Why are you looking at me like that? You are easy to feed." After finishing, Rocky said, "Have you considered settling here?" "Why do you ask?" "Well, I have an apartment for rent." I thought for a moment, "Are you really low on money?" Because he looked quite sincere. "I don't have much income right now, so I may not be able to afford the expensive rent." "I'm very cheap," Rocky said seriously, lying. "No neighbors, I'm scared to be alone." I blinked. He seemed to be tricking me, but I wasn't sure. On the day I was discharged, a spring breeze brought joy to my heart. I smiled for the first time in a while. As I crossed the street, I forgot to check the traffic lights. And Rocky grabbed the back of my collar and pulled me back, making me stumble right into his arms. He held my hand and didn't let go. Chasing you." His voice was light, casual, and his lips curled up slightly, as if he had just said something as simple as "the weather is nice today." Boom. In the distance, a child was shaking a toy drum, playing and making noise. Thump. It was the sound of my heart beating. My voice wavered, but I bravely looked up at Rocky. "I've loved someone for many years, but I'm not sure." The wind ruffled Rocky's hair, and his gaze softened. "Miss Haley, I've loved someone for many years too. Give me a chance." At that moment, my eyes moistened. "I am not good. I've been ill, and my body." "Miss Haley, you once said that you hope everyone will be happy, including yourself." Rocky winked. "I hope your wish comes true." The breeze gently blew. Sunlight pierced through the treetops, landing on his eyebrows. The spring I once thought was unreachable had quietly blossomed, covering the field with color, and the spring was in full bloom. The following winter, Serena's company announced bankruptcy. The people who had bullied Haley were sent to jail by Tony. After several crises, Tony's company was finally revived. On this day, Tony sat alone in his office for a long time. Outside the window, snow fell heavily, and the car lights below stretched out in a continuous line. This was after he had been working for half a month, as if it had been ages. He suddenly remembered, on this day a year ago, it had also snowed. Haley had appeared at the class reunion. When she saw him arrive with Serena, her eyes were filled with confusion and panic. After that, he had dreamed of that scene countless times. He had even dreamed of changing things. He had ended the engagement early, called the police when the manager tried to drug her. He hadn't forced her to drink, and he hadn't said any harsh words to her. He had done exactly as Haley had imagined, bringing about a decent reunion. Haley had returned, curling up in his arms in the middle of the night, telling him what had happened in the past, crying with grievance. Tony held her, kissed her, comforted her, and proposed. Later, they had a home. He and Haley had their wedding photos taken. She smiled beautifully in the photos, their fingers intertwined. Every time he woke up from a dream, he would find himself lying alone in bed, listening to the sound of the clocks ticking. Then he realized that time was moving forward, but Haley would never appear in his life again. She had completely left. On that snowy night in South City, Haley had wished him peace and happiness for the rest of his life, her eyes sincere and calm. She said she wasn't coming back. She felt sad for not having a decent reunion. Her eyes were red as she spoke. Because he had hurt her, she had decided to leave. There were no blaming words, no angry complaints. That peace and happiness for the rest of your life was like a gentle knife, deeply embedded in his heart, bringing eternal pain that could never be worn away. Due to long-term irregular routines, he developed stomach problems. When it flared up, it hurt terribly. That night, he woke up again from a dream, lying on his cold bed with a cold moon outside the window. Faintly, he remembered Haley watching the moon with him. It felt like something from a past life. Suddenly, he missed Haley so much. The next day, he booked a flight ticket to South City. A year later, he returned to this place, still the same weather. The wind was strong and the snow was heavy. People hurried along the road. Tony followed the address and found an apartment. As dusk fell, the lights in the second-floor unit remained off. Tony stood in a corner, waiting. Half an hour later, Haley's voice came, gentle yet serious. The tomato beef brisket at that place isn't good. Next time, buy some brisket, and I'll cook it for you. Alice likes it too. Let's invite her over to eat. Tony instinctively looked over, and the familiar figure suddenly entered his sight. She was wearing a little white hat, or maybe a little pink or gray one. In the snow, all that could be seen was white. Her body had become fuller, walking steadily in the snow, no longer swaying from side to side. Beside her was a tall figure wearing glasses, always watching her with a gentle gaze. He slightly raised his eyes, his gaze landing on Tony, and suddenly froze. The two men stood separated by the snowstorm, neither speaking. "Hey, Rocky, did you hear what I said?" It was the same familiar tone, but this time directed at someone else. Rocky withdrew his gaze. "I heard. You want to make tomato beef brisket, but last time you burnt the pot. I still haven't bought a new one." Haley hung her head in frustration. "Oh, sorry." Rocky patted the top of her hat, as if patting a cute big white bear. "Go home first, the son hasn't been fed yet." "Where are you going?" "To buy a pot." "What about the brisket?" "Buying it together." "So urgent?" We're eating it tonight." Haley quickly ran into the building. Only then did Rocky look over. Tony had nothing to say, so he just said, "Congratulations." Rocky smiled, "Thank you." Actually, he knew Tony had misunderstood. Their son was the cat that he and Haley had raised. But Rocky didn't want to explain. Last year, when he had taken Haley out to make a snowman, he had given Tony a chance. No matter what, Haley and he were already over. They should both be fine. "How's her condition?" "Stable." Rocky answered directly. "She has a good temperament, doesn't like to get angry. She's a great girl." Tony knew she was doing well, because he knew what Haley looked like when she was happy. Rocky's gaze, sharp through his glasses, fixed on Tony. "Mr. Tony, how long have you known her?" 14 years. "You know her better than I do. Her birthday is coming up, and I want to give her a gift. Snacks, preferably puffed foods. She doesn't like chocolate." Tony answered without thinking. Rocky nodded formally. "Thank you." 14 years. "You know her better than I do." These words were Rocky's expression of discontent. If you knew her so well, why did you hate her so much? Why did you let her suffer so much in the years that followed? "Tony?" A clear voice pierced through the snowstorm. Tony turned his head sharply, looking over. That face, which he had been longing for, suddenly appeared in his sight. Even the curve of her smile was exactly the same as in his memory. Haley was holding an umbrella, with something clutched in her arms, her eyes wide in surprise. "You came?" Tony's heart ached as he saw the clarity and calmness in her eyes. She had let go. He paused for a moment and said, "Business trip, passing by. I ran into Mr. Rocky, and we chatted." "Passing by the community?" Haley seemed puzzled. Rocky asked, "Why did you come down again?" Haley suddenly remembered something and handed him the umbrella. "I saw the snow was heavy and worried you'd catch a cold, so I came to give you an umbrella." She spoke to Rocky with a slight smile, her eyes warm. This scene stung Tony's eyes. "Do you want to come to our place?" Rocky politely asked. Tony smiled. "No, I have a flight tonight. I'm in a hurry." Haley pulled her coat tighter and suddenly remembered something. "Wait for me." She turned and ran back into the building. Rocky followed her with a blank expression. Tony waited downstairs for a while as the snow grew heavier. The sky was gray, pressing down on people's chests, suffocating. His stomach began to hurt again. Jack called, "Brother." He hesitated, not sure what to say. "Your test results came out. Stomach cancer." Tony stood motionless, unsure if he had heard it. He looked up at the hazy snowfall and muttered, "I know." Then he hung up. He acted as though nothing had happened, continuing to wait, his gaze always on the doorway of the building. A warm beam of light emerged from the door and fell onto the snow, forming a trapezoid. After a while, Haley came out alone. Rocky had wrapped her up like a helpless cotton ball. She was holding a small red box, struggling to walk over to Tony and handed it to him. "I baked these little cookies myself. Take them with you on the road." Tony took it, suddenly remembering how Haley had liked to bake many years ago. Back then, it was hard to eat, with an eggy smell. All the failures ended up in his stomach. She really had no talent in cooking. Tony even told her that she wasn't allowed in the kitchen at home. In the blink of an eye, she could now make it look quite decent. Haley sincerely said, "Thank you for your donation to our cause." Tony knew her organization helped people with mental illnesses and those facing difficult lives, so he donated every month. He kept only a small part for living expenses. Tony said, "You're welcome." Then he looked at her face. "It's cold. You should go back." "I probably won't be back again." Haley smiled. "How could that be? There will be awards in the future. We'll have to invite you." Tony's throat tightened, and he didn't speak. She turned, her snow boots crunching in the snow. Just before she entered the door, she looked back and called out to him, "Tony." Tony immediately looked up, his heart suddenly coming alive. He waited for her to say something. Haley smiled and simply said, "Happy New Year." A very ordinary New Year's wish. There was no wishing you health and happiness anymore. Tony's heart fell silent again, standing in the cold wind, replying, "Happy New Year." The end. If you like Puppy's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.